Should you buy Infamous Second Son in 2021? Infamous Second Son is the third main installment in the Infamous series. It is of course a PlayStation exclusive. The game was released back in March of 2014 and was released to pretty mixed reception from both fans and critics of the franchise alike. I for one thought the game was fantastic as it took all the other elements of the other two games into account and made itself the best Infamous game ever made. It was also my first PS4 exclusive that I ever played, and honestly it got me into the whole idea of story-based games, and I started to drift off to play more narrative-driven games instead of the mainly multiplayer games that I used to play. Let's see whether the game is still worth buying in 2021. Welcome to Eternal Talks, where I make reviews and video essay-ish content. So if you're interested in this type of content, consider subbing to the channel. Anyway, let's hop into the review by first talking about the game's narrative, spoiler-free. Second Son's story is set in 2018, 7 years after the events of Infamous 2, in which that game's protagonist Cole sacrifices himself to cure humanity and save them from a plague. But with what Cole did, there isn't much conduits left. Conduits are essentially people born with powers, but they are oppressed and looked down upon by the wider society. As the conduit population is at an all-time low, the US government has formed an organization known as the DUP to hunt down and capture the world's remaining conduits, calling them bioterrorists. They would be locked up and wouldn't be able to see the outside world who feared them due to the propaganda of the DUP and the US government as a whole. Our protagonist is a 24-year-old graffiti artist and delinquent known as Delson Rowe, and he's fantastically voice acted by the masterful Troy Baker. Delson at the very start of the game gets a power that is unique to him and something that we really haven't seen in the series thus far, with his power of power mimicry, which allows him to take the powers and abilities of anyone that he comes into contact with that has powers. The story sees him trying to save his tribe, which are basically his family, by going to the head of the DUP and trying to steal her powers. Slowly throughout the game, he rips the DUP from the inside as he infiltrates and absolutely obliterates their bases and command centers, all for his ultimate goal of trying to find the leader of the DUP, known as Augustine. There's a lot of fun characters, and some of the most noticeable ones are the really fun and interesting Eugene, Fetch, and the main character's brother known as Reggie, which really added a lot to the game's narrative, and the character interactions between all of them was really interesting to see in my opinion, and I overall really was a fan of the game's story. It's probably one of my favorite aspects of the game, and I don't think it's one of those instances in which the story is only really there so that the gameplay of the game can excel, and instead I think there's been quite a lot of obvious effort that was put into the narrative of the game, and the developers over at Sucker Punch really did try with the game's narrative, and I've got to say that what they've done is an absolutely fantastic job with the game's story, and in some cases I would say that the story of this game is good on its own and that you should buy it just for this reason. So if you like a good and funny story with some really interesting and funny character interactions, the story of this game will provide exactly that, and the characters in this game are extremely engaging. Quick note before we move on to the gameplay section of this video, and I've just got to say that the game's soundtrack is absolutely amazing, and it's such a good and compelling soundtrack. It just fits in every scenario, and I just can't explain it. Just take a damn listen. Absolutely phenomenal, and I really can't get over how fantastically the talent at Sucker Punch Games has tuned everything in this game. Now let's talk about the fantastic gameplay of Infamous Second Son. The gameplay is so damn good. Just like in Infamous 1 and also the second game, karma plays a big role in the main story of the game. At specific plot points within the game, your karma and actions throughout the implications of how you play Delson will impact the broader world and completely change the path of where the narrative is going and who Delson ends up becoming by the end of the game. Either a light-hearted hero of Seattle or a demonic killer and murderer is condemned by all for his actions against humanity and for abusing his powers for pure evil actions. This contrast is really well done, and luckily it's all done by how you play the game and how evil or good you make Delson out to be, either helping civilians or murdering them in cold blood to get to your objective. Because Delson has so many different powers due to being able to absorb the powers of others, he replaces the electric powers that were concurrent in previous Infamous games with the protagonist Cole, who could only have those electric powers, and instead Delson has a few different powers, which I will not mention here because I want you to see when the powers come one by one, so it's more of a a surprise, and so getting that power will be a lot more fun as well, which is why the gameplay that is in the background only consists of the first power that you can get in the game, which is the awesome and well-made smoke power. Every power that you can get in the game can drastically change the way that you approach most aspects of the game's gameplay. Over the course of the entire game, you'll keep gaining access to new and interesting powers by allying with other conduits and then taking their powers to achieve your ultimate goal of taking down the entirety of the DUP and their forces, as well as of course the head of the DUP, who is of course Augustine. Delson can only use one power at a time, but you can drain and find sources to use the other powers in your arsenal while free roaming the map, and switching between these different powers is no hard task and is instead very fluid and works well in the flow and conjunction of the gameplay itself. Players can shoot without having to aim as well, and this can instill an awesome flow into combat, making it more fluid and quick as well, as you just spray all the enemies in your vicinity with whatever power that you're currently using. Absorbing the powers when you find the source is done through the touchpad, as this game does utilize a lot of the features of the DualShock 4 controller, such as the touchpad, and the aiming, shooting, and handling in general is so damn good, and again, it's just so fluid. The game's gameplay is fantastic overall, from switching between all your different powers to flying, running, and teleporting across the game's expansive open world. There's a lot to unpack within the core gameplay elements of this game, but I don't want to drag this video on. But if you were considering picking the game up after seeing the story section of this video, the gameplay should have just been that extra push that would make you finally play and buy this fantastic video game. So I honestly believe that you need to buy this game if you haven't already, as it is easily one of the best PlayStation 4 exclusives, and the game is generally wonderful with this amazing and extremely engaging gameplay mechanics and open world environment to the game's awesome narrative and well-made characters that really make the game one of the best on the PlayStation 4. If you enjoyed this video, let me know down below in the comments and consider leaving a like on this video. If you bought the game because of this video, let me know as well. Anyway, that's all from me for today's video. Peace.